You wake up in darkness. The last thing you remember is screaming. Your village is burning. Hands grabbing you. And now, silence. You don't know where you are. The air smells like incense and something else. Something you can't name. Fear, maybe, or the absence of hope. Welcome to the Sultan's palace. You'll never leave. This is the story they erased from history books. Not about kings and battles. Not about glory or gold. This is about the women who vanished. The ones taken alive. The ones whose names were never written down. And what happened to them inside those walls was worse than death. Before you go further, if you're drawn to the dark corners of history that textbooks won't touch, hit that subscribe button. This channel uncovers the stories they try to bury. You won't find this anywhere else. For centuries, the great empires of the East held absolute power. Ottoman sultans, Mughal emperors, Persian shahs, they ruled millions. They commanded armies, and they took whatever they wanted. One of the things they wanted most: women. Not for marriage, not for love, for something much darker. When armies conquered new lands, soldiers were told to take prisoners. The men were often killed or enslaved. But the women, especially the young, the beautiful, the ones from noble families, they were brought back alive. They were gifts, trophies, property, and they were delivered to one place: the harem. You've probably heard that word before. Harem. In movies, it sounds exotic, mysterious, even romantic. Silk curtains, perfume, music. But that's a lie. The harem wasn't a paradise. It was a prison. And for the women inside, survival meant giving up everything they were. Let's place you there. You're 16 years old. You lived in a small town on the edge of the empire. Your father was a merchant. Your mother taught you to read. You had a name, a future, maybe someone you loved. Then the soldiers came. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need reasons. They just took. You were bound, thrown into a cart with dozens of other girls. Some screamed. Some begged. You stayed silent, hoping silence would keep you safe. It didn't. The journey lasted weeks. You crossed deserts, mountains, rivers. You barely ate. You barely slept. Girls died along the way. Their bodies were left on the roadside like trash. No one buried them. No one remembered their names. Finally, you arrived. The palace rose before you like a fortress. Walls so high you couldn't see the top. Gates so thick you knew they'd never open again. You were led inside. The first thing they did was strip you. Not just your clothes. Your identity. Your name? Gone. From now on, you'd be called whatever they decided. Gül, Ice, Layla. Names that meant nothing to you. Names that erased where you came from. Your language? Forbidden. You had to learn theirs. If you didn't, you'd be punished. Beaten. Starved. Locked away in rooms with no light. Your family? You'd never see them again. And even if you did, you wouldn't recognize yourself. Because the palace changed you. They bathed you, oiled your skin, dressed you in silk, taught you to walk differently, speak differently, smile when you want to scream. You were being molded, shaped into something the Sultan might want. But here's the truth they don't tell you. Most women in the harem never even saw the Sultan. There were hundreds of you, sometimes thousands, all crammed into the same palace, all waiting, all hoping, no, praying that you be chosen, because being chosen was the only way to survive. Life in the harem was a hierarchy of suffering. At the top were the favorites, the women the Sultan had slept with, the ones who bore his children. They had power, protection, rooms with windows. Below them were the hopefuls, the ones still young enough, still beautiful enough to be noticed. They spent their days learning to dance, to sing, to please. And at the bottom, the forgotten ones. Women who aged out, women who got sick, women who broke the rules or simply stopped being interesting. They were sent to the lower levels of the palace, into rooms that smelled like rot, into jobs that broke their backs, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, serving the women who used to be their equals. They became invisible. And if you became invisible in the harem, you stopped being human. Let's say you were one of the lucky ones. You were chosen. The Sultan called for you one night. You were terrified, excited, hopeful. Maybe this meant safety. Maybe this meant power. You were taken to his chambers. You did what you were told. You didn't resist. You couldn't. And then It was over. He dismissed you. You went back to the harem, and now you waited again. This time for something worse. Would you become pregnant? If you did, your status rose. You became a mother of a prince. You were protected, fed well, given your own servants. But if you didn't, you disappeared back into the sea of women. Just another face, another body, another forgotten name. And every day, new girls arrive. Younger, prettier, more desperate to please. You were already being replaced. Inside the harem, survival wasn't about strength. It was about silence. You learned quickly. Don't ask questions. Don't make friends. Don't trust anyone. Because the other women weren't your sisters. They were your competition. Every smile had a knife. Every kind word was a test. If you shared a secret, it would be used against you. If you showed weakness, you'd be crushed. The women who thrived were the ones who learned to manipulate, to spy, to betray. There were networks of informants. Girls who whispered to the eunuchs. Eunuchs who whispered to the Sultan's mother. And the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, she controlled everything. She decided who got called, who got punished, who disappeared. And if she didn't like you, you were done. You tried to stay invisible. You kept your head down. You followed every rule. But one day, you made a mistake. Maybe you laughed too loudly. Maybe you looked at someone the wrong way. Maybe another girl accused you of stealing something you didn't do, but it didn't matter. You were dragged out of your room in the middle of the night. They didn't tell you where they were taking you. They didn't have to. You were thrown into a cell. No windows, no light, just stone walls and the smell of mildew. You stayed there for days, maybe weeks. You lost track. No food, a little water, enough to keep you alive, but not enough to keep you strong. When they finally let you out, you were different, quieter, more obedient. That was the point. The worst punishment wasn't physical. It was psychological. Some women were locked away and forgotten. Not killed, just erased. They were moved to the old wings of the palace. Sections that hadn't been opened in years. Rooms filled with dust and darkness. No one checked on them. No one brought them food. They were left to rot. Some women went mad. They talked to themselves, scratched at the walls, screamed until their voices gave out. Others just waited. For death. For mercy. For anything. But nothing came. You're witnessing history's darkest secret. If this shook you, share it. Hit like. Drop a comment. Let's make sure these stories are never forgotten again. Let's say you to get pregnant. Let's say you gave the Sultan a son. You'd think that would save you. And for a while it did. You were moved to better rooms. Given servants. Jewelry. Respect. But there was a cost. Your son wasn't really yours. He belonged to the empire. He was raised by tutors. Eunuchs. Officials. You barely saw him. And if the Sultan died, if a new Sultan took power, your son became a threat. Because in many empires, there was a brutal tradition. When a new Sultan took the throne, he killed all his brothers. Every single one. It didn't matter if they were children. It didn't matter if they were innocent. They were threats to his power. So they were strangled, drowned, poisoned. And you, his mother, you had to watch. Or worse, you were forced to help. Some mothers were told, deliver your son to the executioners, or you'll die too. What would you do? Even if your son survived, you were never free. You lived in constant fear. Every whisper in the hallway was a threat. Every new concubine was a rival. Every smile from the Sultan's mother was a test. You couldn't leave. You couldn't write letters. You couldn't send messages to your family, if they were even still alive. You were trapped, and the years passed. You watched yourself age in the mirror. The beauty that brought you here, the only thing that gave you value, it faded. Your skin wrinkled. Your hair turned gray. Your body ached. And one day, you realized no one was looking at you anymore. You had become invisible. There were women who lived in the harem for 60 years. 60 years. They arrived as girls. They died as ghosts. No one remembered their real names. No one knew where they came from. No records. No graves. No legacy. They were erased. Some of them tried to escape. They bribed guards, climbed walls, disguised themselves as servants. But the punishment for trying to escape was death. Not a quick death. Slow death. They were sewn into sacks and thrown into the river. Alive. They drowned in darkness, weighted down by stones, knowing that no one would ever find their bodies. That was the message. You are property. You don't get to leave. This wasn't one story. This was thousands of stories. Across the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire, Persia, China. For centuries, this system existed. Women disappeared into palaces and never came out. And the world didn't care. Historians didn't write about them. Poets didn't sing about them. Artists didn't paint them. They were invisible in life. And they stayed invisible in death. But you need to understand, these weren't just concubines. They weren't volunteers. They weren't there by choice. They were prisoners, slaves, human beings whose lives were stolen. And the worst part? Some of them were children. Girls as young as 9 or 10 were brought into the harem. They were trained for years before the Sultan ever touched them. Trained, like animals. That's what the palace did. It turned human beings into objects. It took daughters, sisters, mothers, and made them disappear. Let's talk about what happened when the harem was cleaned. Every few decades, when a sultan grew old or paranoid, he'd order a purge. Too many women. Too many mouths to feed. Too many potential spies. So they were removed. Not freed. Removed. Some were sent to distant estates, prisons in everything but name. Guarded. Isolated. Left to die slowly. Others drowned. Poisoned. Strangled in their sleep. And the rest? They were sold. Sold to merchants. Sold to nobles. Sold to men who wanted used women they could control. Imagine that. You survived years in the palace. You endured the fear, the violence, the humiliation. And your reward? Being sold like cattle. You had no say, no rights, no voice. You were property. And property gets discarded when it's no longer useful. Let's bring you back one final time. You're older now. Maybe 30. Maybe 40. It's hard to tell. The years blur together. You've survived. You've watched girls arrive and disappear. You've seen women lose their minds. You've buried secrets deeper than bones. You don't cry anymore. You don't hope anymore. You just exist. One day the guards come. They tell you the Sultan is dead. A new one has taken the throne. You feel nothing. You've seen this before. Then they tell you the harem is being emptied. Your heart stops. You're taken outside. For the first time in 20 years, you see the sky. It's overwhelming. The light hurts. The air feels wrong. You don't remember how to walk in open space. You're loaded into a cart with dozens of other women. No one speaks. No one looks at each other. You're driven for days. You don't know where you're going. Finally, you arrive at a compound. Walls. Guards. Another prison. This is where you'll die. Not in glory. Not remembered. Just gone. What did the harem do to these women? It didn't just imprison their bodies. It destroyed their minds. Many women developed what we now call PTSD, depression, anxiety, dissociation. They forgot their native languages. They forgot their families' faces. They forgot who they were before. Some women convinced themselves they were happy, that the palace was an honor, that serving the Sultan was a privilege. That was survival. That was the mind protecting itself from unbearable truth. Because if you admitted what was really happening, if you let yourself feel the full weight of it, you'd break. So you didn't. You buried it. You became someone else. And eventually, the girl you used to be, she was gone. Here's what history won't tell you. This wasn't rare. This wasn't an exception. This was the system. Empires were built on stolen women. Palaces were filled with them. Bloodlines continued through them. And no one questioned it. Because these women didn't matter. Not to the sultans. Not to the historians. Not to the world. They were tools. Vessels. Shadows. And when they died, they left nothing behind. No names on graves. No records in archives. No stories passed down. Just silence. Think about that for a moment. Thousands of women. Maybe millions across centuries. All of them had lives before. Dreams. Families. Futures. And all of it was taken. Not in war. Not in battle. But in quiet rooms. Behind locked doors. In systems designed to erase them. This is the history they don't teach. Because it's uncomfortable. Because it's ugly. Because it forces us to see empires not as glorious, but as machines of suffering. The palaces we admire in textbooks, they were built on bones. The sultans we read about, they were surrounded by ghosts. And the women? They're still forgotten. You might think this is ancient history, something that only happened long ago. But it didn't stop. Even as late as the early 1900s, harems still existed. Women were still taken, still imprisoned, still erased. And the systems that allowed it, they didn't disappear. They just changed form. Human trafficking, forced marriage, sexual slavery, domestic imprisonment. It's still happening, right now, in different ways. But the core is the same: women being stolen, silenced, erased. History didn't end this. We just stopped talking about it. So what do we do with this? We can't bring those women back. We can't undo what was done. But we can remember. We can say their names, even if we don't know them. We can refuse to romanticize the past. Refuse to call palaces beautiful when they were prisons. Refuse to call sultans great when they were monsters. We can choose to see history clearly. Not the version written by the victors, but the version written in the margins, in the silences, in the lives that were erased. Because that's where the truth is. Imagine spending your entire life locked in a building, never seeing your family again, never speak your native language, never hearing your real name, just waiting, hoping, surviving, and then dying, alone, forgotten. That was the fate of the women in the Sultan's palace. Not all of them, but enough, more than enough. And the worst part? No one cared. Not then, and for a long time, not now. But you're here. You listened. You know. And that matters. If this story shook you, it should. This is the history they try to bury. Don't let it stay buried. Subscribe. Share this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Let's make sure these women are never forgotten again. The next time you see an old palace in a documentary or a history book, ask yourself, who lived there? Not the kings, not the generals, the women, the ones whose names we'll never know, the ones who were taken, who disappeared, who died in silence. They were real, they suffered, and they deserve to be remembered. This is their story, and it should never be forgotten. Fade to black. No music, no words, just silence. The same silence that swallowed them.